As we have mentioned in the past, I believe the book of Ecclesiastes was probably written by Solomon and probably written by him in his older years after he had experienced life in just about every imaginable way. He sought after the pleasures of this world. He sought after riches. And when he looks back at it all, he really, and I probably should have added verse 8 to that reading, but when he eventually comes to the conclusion, vanity of vanities, all was vanity, saith the preacher. He gives some very valuable life lessons. And when I say the preacher, and I notice it's in quotes because it's relating to the preacher that wrote Ecclesiastes. If it be Solomon, or if it not be Solomon, it's obviously somebody who's experienced life in various ways, and that experience has now propelled him or encouraged him to give some wisdom about how we should view life as well. When you read through that first section of chapter 12, it's probably kind of interesting. We know verse 1, right? Because we challenge young people all the time with it. We challenge them to remember their Creator in their days of their youth, and we warn them about the difficult times that are approaching and the warnings about maybe they'll forget about who God is and the disconnect that can occur. Then he goes on to describe in the rest of the chapter what it's like to get old. He talks about how the grinders cease, the teeth don't chew just quite the same as they once did. The wheels are broken at the system. The legs don't motivate you. The almond tree flourishes. The dark hair is no longer so dark anymore, at least without chemical help. And so you know that the aging process sometimes isn't always pleasant. The other day I was with Mom for a little while, and she just looked at me and she said, "Brian, getting old isn't for the faint of heart." It's hard. And along the path, sometimes there are difficulties that arise. And so this morning, I want to share with you just 4 things that I believe the preacher of Ecclesiastes shares with us. There's lots more than that, but I want to share with you 4 things about life that I believe he shares with us that will maybe be valuable for us to appreciate. And the first thing, the first 2 really aren't all that pleasant, but they're realities, and that is, first of all, life isn't always easy. I fear, and this, I suppose, that every generation probably says this, and so maybe I'm just following suit. I don't know. But I fear that we don't challenge people to do hard things anymore. There's evidence of that, by the way, societally and even economically. There are lots of opportunities for people willing to do hard jobs right now. Throughout this valley, there are all kinds of occupations and works, but they're hard. They're hard work. They're things that take a lot of sweat and a lot of strength and a lot of ability and skill sets. And sometimes folks just aren't willing to do hard things. But the fact of the matter is, life isn't always going to be easy. As a parent, I would love to kick every rock and stone out of the way of my children. I'd love to run in front of them and make sure that any barrier or stumbling block or difficulty that they might experience, that I can just kind of knock it out of the way before they ever arrive to it. But I would be doing them a disservice if I did that. Because at times they also, even in the youth, remember thy Creator in the days of thy youth. Appreciate certain things when you're young. That hard work sometimes is beneficial because everything isn't always going to be easy. Notice 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7 with me for a moment. 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and in verse 7. So Paul writes, and this is his second letter to Corinth. His first one wasn't very pleasing, by the way, to them anyway. It's pretty hard. It had some great condemnations. But they've repented. There's some changes that have happened. But notice what he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 7. "And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure." Paul says, I've been given a great opportunity to serve the Lord. There's been a lot of wisdom given to him by inspiration. There's been a great work and a great blessing of being able to be a proclaimer of the message of Jesus Christ in its infancy. I mean, you think about the dozens and dozens of churches in various cities throughout various regions that Paul had a hand in making sure they knew about Jesus the Christ and the establishment of so many local bodies of God's people, all because of the work and purposes that God had blessed Paul to be a part of. But he says, lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, God also kept me in check. And He gave me a thorn in the flesh to buffet me, a messenger of Satan, to make sure that I stayed humble, basically, Paul says. Notice verse 8. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. Have you ever pleaded for something with the Lord over and over and over again, and the result is always the same? It's hard. Sometimes it's not easy to remain faithful when it seems like I'm beseeching the Lord, and that's what He asked me to do. He encourages me to urge upon Him and to plead with Him and to offer my petitions before Him. And sometimes the answers don't come as I would like. And it's hard for me to stay humble and stay focused and stay faithful. But Paul said, He said unto me, Jesus, my grace is sufficient for you, verse 9. For my strength is made perfect in weakness. By the way, did you notice that that's Jesus' statement? For my strength is made perfect in weakness is Jesus' words. It applies to Paul, and he needs to appreciate it, but to the words of Jesus. Think about it. The greatest moment in the power of evidence of Jesus was His most weakest physically. When they're able to nail Him to a cross and slay Him there upon that cross, and ultimately His body is taken to a grave, a tomb. The greatest weakness of Jesus, a moment in His weakness where His physical body is actually put to the cross and put to death, becomes His greatest example of power. Paul, in your weakness, you can still do great things. Paul, in your difficulties, you can still do wonderful things for the cause of Christ. Even though Satan is buffeting you, even though Satan is challenging you, even though this thorn in the flesh, which you've prayed about over and over again, is yet to be removed. I challenge you to accept and adjust, Paul. Sometimes in life, it's not, I get the answer I want. Sometimes the answer is accept the thorn in the flesh and adjust. And embrace the grace that is extended unto you. Don't deny what God actually is doing for you because He's not willing to do, or in our minds, not willing to do this for me. Sometimes we have to accept and adjust in life. It's not always easy. We need to appreciate that complaint's not the answer. I don't want to read the entire chapter of Numbers 13 with you, but just jog your memories for a minute, right? You get an opportunity to go into Promised Land. What I love about the narrative in Numbers chapter 13, friends, is simply this. God didn't say, I'm going to want you to go in and spy out the land that I might give to you. He told them to go in and spy out the land that I'm giving. It's yours. When God speaks about the Promised Land, He speaks about it in terms and thoughts that is already something God has extended unto them. Their job was simple. Go spy it out, figure out where people are, figure out the ways we might be able to go in, bring back some of the fruit, because I think that'll get people excited. It did, until the nevertheless guys showed up, right? When they saw the grapes upon that staff that took 2 guys to carry. You know, I like grapes, but I never call any of you and say, I'm going to Walmart to get some grapes. Will you come help me carry them home? But it took that for them to bring back 1 cluster. God says, this is the place I'm giving you. Then the nevertheless 5 spoke up and said, we can't take it. Why? Because it's too hard. We saw the giants in the land. The sons of Anak lived there. There's no way for us to take. That's too hard. Sometimes the greatest blessings in life are hard to receive. Sometimes the greatest successes in life don't come easy. Sometimes the things that are necessary for me in my life are not going to come easy. Yeah, you're going to have to go into that land, and you're going to have to take over the giants, and you're going to have to battle some walled cities, and you're going to have a lot of hard work in front of you. But the Lord is going to go step by step with you. The same Jehovah that parted the Red Sea, the same Jehovah that sent the 10 plagues, the same Jehovah who's guided you every step and every time there was a challenge has provided answer, that same God is going to be with you. Our walk of faith is not always going to be easy, but sometimes it's worth doing hard things to stay steadfast in our faith. Sometimes we have to make hard choices, and sometimes we have to make difficult decisions, and sometimes they're very deeply personal. And sometimes it doesn't make us the most popular person in the room, and it's not always simple. But it's worth it. The promises of God are always worth doing the challenging things. So don't complain, oh boy, how in the world are we going to take that promised land? Complaint's not the answer. And we need to recognize, friends, that the world is not devoted to my happiness. The world's goal isn't to make Brian happy. And the more I live my faith, the less of a goal it becomes for the world to make Brian happy. I need to seek joy in my relationship with God and with His people. I need to recognize that happiness isn't relevant to what the world thinks brings joy, but happiness is relevant to what God says will bring deep and lasting and meaningful joy. But it's not always easy to turn a blind eye to what the world is conveying to me and embrace what God has said. And sometimes there aren't any quick answers. Life isn't always easy. And sometimes we're not going to be able to have that quick and satisfying answer that we're looking for. Sometimes it takes a progression of time and energy and effort. And sometimes that we have to be willing to put in that effort and time. To find a resolve and to find an answer to the difficulties we may be experiencing. I think we become so contented or so desiring maybe of quick and easy solutions. You remember the series, I'm careful to say this because I hope you'll remember the series of books, but they had a series of books and it was all for dummies, right? Microsoft, and it was that was the way they marketed the books. And the idea was, we're going to make it simple for you. But the book was that thick, right? I looked at the book and I think, well, that's supposed to make things simple for me, but that book's way too... I want the Cliff Note version, right? I want this... You got a pamphlet? That's the way we like things. The simpler the better, but life isn't always that way. Life isn't always going to hand you the simple and easy answers. Life isn't always going to just present to you a nice, simplified, concise, easy to approach answer to life. Sometimes we have to do hard things. And work and effort is worth it. Lest I spend all my time on point 1, let's just jump to Proverb 12. Proverb 12 and verse 27. Proverb 12 verse 27 graves a great principle. He simply said, the lazy man does not roast what he took in honey, but diligence is man's precious possession. Ever tell you about the fellow I knew down in Tennessee? He loved to fish. And everybody that knew he loved fish, they'd always say, boy, I'd love to have some fresh fish. And you ever catch a big old mess of fish, I'd be glad to take. And so he'd call these folks that would tell him that. And you know what they would always ask when he did? They'd say, are they cleaned yet? It wasn't long before they were asking, did you fry them yet? Oh, they wanted fish, but they wanted it from Long John Silver's, right? They wanted it put in a plastic and handed to them, ready to go. He says a lazy man won't even roast up. He'd go out and hunt. He barely got enough energy to do that. But now he's got his game right there before him, but he won't skin it and he won't roast it. And so it never did him any benefit. I don't know how else to describe the proverb, but to just simply say, don't be lazy. That's what he said. Don't be lazy. Life has too many difficult challenges to it. And there's hard things that have to be accomplished. And a lazy man's going to struggle. The sluggard's going to have more difficulties. And he's going to create greater problems for himself. Don't be lazy. Because it won't bring any answer, number one. And it'll create more difficulties for us, number two, if we're not careful. Notice Proverb 19, verse 15, real quick. Similar sentiment. Where he said, laziness casts one into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. Friends, life isn't always easy. It's going to take work. We're going to have to do hard things, and we can't be lazy about it. And especially matters of faith, and especially matters of our spiritual walk with Christ, and especially in matters of trying to make sure that I sustain my relationship with Jehovah that will ultimately bring saving grace to me at the end of this life. Life isn't always easy. Number 2. These will come quicker. Life isn't always fair. That, by the way, doesn't mean that we can be unfair. That doesn't mean that we should treat people in unfair ways because we just throw over the cloak of, well, life isn't fair. Sorry about your luck. Right? That doesn't mean we can be unfair, but the truth is it doesn't always happen in fair ways. I want you to notice something with me in Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, verse 43. Part of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is preaching. And he says in verse 43, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." That's fair, right? In human wisdom, that would be fair. Love those who love you, hate those that hate you. That's fair in the world's eyes. Jesus says, not in my eyes. That's what you've heard. And you believe that that's the right approach to things. But I say to you, love your enemies. Wait a minute, that's not fair. They get to mistreat me, but I got to love them. They get to do harm to me and say evil things about me and bring reproach to me and cause me difficulty, and I got to love them. That's not fair. And God says, yeah, it may not sound fair in human wisdom, but that's what I want from you. Bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use and persecute you, that you may be the sons of your Father in heaven. For He makes His sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. Friends, in human wisdom, that's not fair. I'm a servant of God. I'm living faithfully. I'm trying to honor Him. I'm doing everything I can to be dedicated to Him, and that guy gets the same sun and rain that I do? What's fair about that? We're using too much human wisdom. It doesn't seem fair to have to treat our enemies with kindness when they mistreat me. It doesn't seem fair that I'm faithful to God and that guy gets the same blessings and benefits that I get. But sometimes things don't fit the human wisdom fairness rules. And you and I have to be ready for that. Good and bad happens to all. Rain and sun falls on everybody. And it doesn't necessarily show favoritism. You see, the blessing we have is not that nothing difficult will ever arrive or nothing that seems unfair will ever occur to us. The answer to this is that God helps us when life treats us unfairly. We have a Creator who's concerned about our well-being, that we can pray before and beseech, and He can strengthen us. But life isn't always fair. Sometimes the sun comes up when we need rain, and sometimes the rain comes when we need the sun. And I've got to be ready to be able to overcome that when it comes to my faith, and I do that by focusing on the inward man. We become enamored and focused upon what's happening on the outside, then we're going to run into difficulties. But if we'll focus on the inward man, then we can find answer. Notice verse 15 of chapter 4 of 2 Corinthians. Paul speaking. For all things are for your sakes, that grace having spread through the many cause thanksgiving to abound to the glory of God. Therefore we do not lose heart, even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. When life treats you unfairly, renew your inward man in your relationship with God. When your enemies seem to be victorious, when you were looking for sun and it rained, or you were looking for rain and the sun came out, and the outward things seem to be beating us down, restore yourself from the inside out. We can't always expect our external world and the people around us and the circumstances around us to be the strength that we're looking for. Sometimes that strength must come from within. And though that we are rejected and challenged and harmed in various ways that may even be unfair, even in the eyes of the Apostle Paul, I will focus on the inward man and not let the unfairness of human existence and the human wisdom that we often apply to that be a detriment to my faith. I'm going to keep a Christ-centered life. No matter what comes, Jesus is at the center. No matter what life brings to me, whether it's hard or easy, whether I abound or whether I'm abased, whether I have great things happening or difficult moments that are not always enjoyable to deal with, I'm going to stay Christ-centered every step of the way. Number 3, let's change it. So yeah, sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes we'll have to do hard things. Sometimes it's not fair. But it isn't always bad. We've got to be careful, right? We sound like the old hee-haw show. Gloom, despair, and agony on me, right? Where all we can see is the hardships and the difficulties and just everything's there. Don't let the world win that battle over your life. To where you convince yourself that life is always just a drudgery and just so dry and boring and of no... God never said that you need to be bored all your life. God didn't say there wasn't anything that could bring joy. And go back to the book of Ecclesiastes. Let's notice something the preacher said earlier in the book. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 24. Nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. It's okay to enjoy life. It's all right to smile and appreciate that God has, through His hand, has provided benefit and blessing to me. Now, the Ecclesiastes writer writes a lot about keeping all that in balance. And he writes a lot about not trusting in riches and recognizing that just as quickly as the blessings may arrive, they can easily slip away. And if you were relying upon those things, vanity of vanity, saith the preacher. But he also tells us in the moment, enjoy the work of your labor. You've worked hard at something, sit back and appreciate it for a minute. It's okay. You ever tackled a piece of your house that's been needing straightened up or rearranged or checked on for a little while, and you haven't bothered with it because it's hard work, right? And it seems almost overwhelming. Where'd all this stuff come from? And then you get after it a little bit, and you just keep working at it, and you work at it, and then you get done, and you step back, and there's this sense of satisfaction, right? What was once cluttered is now organized. What was once so disorganized you couldn't find yourself, let alone anything else in it. And now it's a functioning, purposeful, and there's a sense of joy almost that comes because we've accomplished the work that was before us. The writer of Ecclesiastes is telling us that's a good thing. Appreciate the labor of your work and the hard effort that you put forth. Appreciate the beauty of what your hard work towards your faith. You know, friends, I guarantee you there's going to be a day where every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. I will sure be more happy in that moment knowing that I confessed throughout my life. Knowing that I put the hard work and the labor that was necessary to have a kind of relationship with God that was of value to me. And enjoy being a child of God. Enjoy being a child of God. It's okay to smile about the fact that God blesses us and encourages us and strengthens us and that I'm a believer. As our young people are heading back to colleges and to secondary and elementary education, it's good for us to remind them it's okay to be a believer and smile about it. And don't feel like that's something you have to apologize to anybody for. I'm a child of God and glad to be such. And yes, sometimes that means that I'm not going to be able to do everything my classmates do. Sometimes it's going to keep me out of some things that they want me to engage in. But there's reason behind why God gives me warnings and challenges me not to involve myself in certain things, because He wants me to keep the joy in life. God knows what destroys joy. God knows what harms people's lives and makes it more difficult than it needs to be. And so He warns us, sure He does, and He guides us, sure He does. But He wants you to enjoy being His child. He wants you and I to appreciate that life can be good. And even though there are still some hard things and difficult things and challenges that we have to face, smile once in a while. It's not all bad. Verse 9 of Ecclesiastes 11, Rejoice, O young man, in your youth. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these God will bring you into judgment. Judgment, by the way, isn't always bad. Judgment can be good. The judgment can be, good job, young man. You were given opportunities and you took the right paths and you made the right choice. Good job. That may be the judgment of God. He says, enjoy life. Follow your heart. Enjoy the things that are set before you. Just remember that ultimately we'll give account for that. So make sure they're positive things. Make sure they're good things. Life isn't always boring. And finally, friends, this morning, life isn't always predetermined. Sometimes I fear that people get on a path and they've decided that that's just the lot I have in life and there's not a thing I can do about it. And that's not true. Every aspect of who you are right now doesn't have to predetermine what you will be. Jesus Christ in the gospel is the most life-changing person and message that man has ever known. It has taken people far worse than you and I and turned them into believers and followers. It took a man by the name of Saul of Tarsus who was willing to hold the coats of those who were throwing the stones at Stephen. Who, when the voices came forth about whether they should stone Stephen or not, he consented. That's exactly what we should do. And yet that same man became the Apostle Paul, who went about doing great things in the kingdom of God. I think in some ways when Christ approaches him on that road to Damascus, that in many ways Jesus is telling him, listen, Paul, you may think that this is a predetermined path. You have risen up the ranks of power among the Jews, and you sat at the feet of Gamaliel, and you feel like you have to stay this course of being a Pharisee among Pharisees. But it's hard to kick against the goads, Paul. You know where the truth lies in these matters. And fortunately for so many that heard the gospel because of his work, Paul did not determine that his path had to be predetermined and that he had to stay on a course just because he chose it initially. Friends, our lives are a cycle of choices and decisions. From the trivial and mundane to the important and vital. We're not on a predetermined course. Now, sure, the Bible gives us some predetermined things. If you do or choose this path, then this is the consequence. Or if you choose this path, here's the reward or benefit. So in that sense, there are some predetermined things. But your personal choices are not predetermined. Went to summer camp one year. The first time I'd witnessed it, I saw it several times after that. And it's a good idea, actually, for younger kids. But I noticed that there was one family and she had sent their clothes in plastic bags. And they were marked Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And I kind of chuckled at that initially, although I saw the wisdom in it. But I went over to one of those young boys at one point at the camp. If you know me very well, you know I would do this. I walked over to him. I said, let's be rebellious today. Switch Thursday and Tuesday. And he just looked at me and he realized, well, my mom put Tuesday, and so that's what I'm wearing on Tuesday. I'm like, good for you, son. But life isn't always that way. It's not always that easy. Life isn't always arranged in a way where do this Monday, do this Tuesday, do this, do this, do this. It's not always that simple. There's choices that have to be made, decisions that have to be made. And they're not always labeled. And there's not always going to be somebody around to help. And sometimes we need to remind ourselves that I don't have to stay on a collision course with destruction. I don't have to stay on a path and a course that's leading me away from God. As we make choices and decisions, our life becomes filled with reward and consequence. And some of those are long-term issues, and some of them are short-term issues. But let the Creator set the tone and the path. Let me share one more text with you, and I'll complete our study for this morning. Go back to Deuteronomy chapter 30. Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verse 19. I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live, that you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey His voice, and that you may cling to Him. For He is your life and the length of your days, and that you may dwell in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them. Life and death, salvation and condemnation, heaven and hell, real choices that are set before us. And you're not on a predetermined path. You can make choices to alter the direction and alter the result. You can make life choices today and say, I choose life. I choose the path of the Creator. I choose the salvation in Jesus. I choose faith in Him. I choose to honor His will and purposes for me. I don't want this sin. I don't want the condemnation and consequences it brings. I want something better for my life. And I know it's not always going to be easy, and it's not always going to be fair. But I also know with it will come great blessing. With it I know my inward man will be renewed day by day. And I can get up every day with a smile on my face and with joy in my heart, knowing that I'm a child of God, a follower of the great Jesus the Christ. And I'll make my choices and decisions based on who I am as a believer in God. And it doesn't have to be predetermined, and it doesn't have to stay a negative course of action. Maybe today's the day to step out into His promises. Maybe today's the day that you renew your relationship with Him. Maybe today's the day I say, I want the life that God intended for me. And I want to be His follower. And if we could help you in that, to die with Christ through baptism today, or to step back into His promises, if we could strengthen you or encourage you, won't you come as we stand and as we sing?